I found them by accident. A hospital hallway that smelled like disinfectant and lies. His voice, soft, careful, saying words he had never said to me. And don't worry, I'm right here. My world didn't shatter loudly. It collapsed in silence. I stood behind the vending machine. Fingers wrapped around my phone like it could keep me upright. Through the glass wall, I saw my husband, my perfect, respected, untouchable husband, holding the belly of another woman. She was glowing in that cruel way pregnant women glow, one hand resting where my future was supposed to be. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Not rushed. Practiced. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Don't scream. Don't cry. Don't run. Because weak women run. And I was about to become something else. That night, he came home late. I served dinner warm, just the way he liked it. I asked about his day. I laughed at the right moments. When he showered, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, replaying the way his hand had moved over her stomach. Protective, proud. So that's who you are now, I thought. A man with 2 lives. In bed, he touched me out of habit. I let him. I stared at the ceiling and memorized the sound of his breathing. Every inhale was theft. Every exhale was betrayal. Days passed. I became quieter, smaller, the kind of woman men stopped noticing. He liked that. He mistook my silence for surrender. I followed him without being seen. I learned her name. I learned where she lived. I learned her due date. I learned that she believed he was in the middle of a divorce. That I was unstable, cruel, already gone. I smiled when I heard that. Because villains never know they're villains. The first move wasn't confrontation. It was preparation. I met lawyers who didn't flinch when I said his name. I pulled files, bank statements, contracts he had signed without reading, because he trusted me. I had always handled the boring things. He had called me lucky to be taken care of. Men like him never notice the hands on the wheel. One evening, I cooked his favorite meal again. He looked tired, distracted, happy in a way that had nothing to do with me. I need you to sign something, I said softly, sliding papers across the table. It's about the company. Just a formality. He barely glanced at them. You always worry too much, he said, signing where I pointed. Ink dried, so did his fate. Weeks later, I asked him to come with me somewhere special. He complained. I insisted. In the elevator, my reflection looked calm, almost fragile. His hand rested casually in his pocket. He had no idea what was already gone. The door opened onto a private conference room. Glass walls, a long table, 3 lawyers waiting. He frowned. What's this? I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The video filled the room. Hospital hallway, his voice, his hand on her stomach. The words, I'm right here. The color drained from his face. I caught you, I said. Finally meeting his eyes. My voice didn't shake. With a pregnant woman, he stammered. Reached for me. It's not what you think. I stepped back. Then I slid the final document across the table, slowly. Carefully, sign, I said. And you walk out with your reputation intact. His hands trembled as he read. Every page stole something from him. Assets, control, power, the life he thought was permanent. You can't do this, he whispered. I leaned in close enough for only him to hear. Oh, I said gently. I already did. The pen hovered over the paper. Sweat formed at his hairline. Outside the glass walls, the city moved on. Unaware that a man was being erased in real time. He looked at me like I was a stranger. That was the first honest thing between us in years. The pen touched the paper. And I smiled just a little. Not because it was over. Because it had finally begun. The moment the pen left the paper, something inside him broke. He sat back slowly. Like a man whose bones had turned to dust. The lawyers gathered the documents with professional indifference. One of them nodded at me, not with sympathy, but respect. That look fed something cold and steady inside my chest. You planned this, my husband said hoarsely. I didn't answer. Silence had become my sharpest weapon. We rode the elevator down together. No one spoke. His reflection in the mirrored walls looked older, smaller. When the doors opened, I walked out first. I didn't look back. That night, he didn't come home. By morning, the company accounts were frozen. His accounts, to be precise. The board meeting he had dominated for years ended in chaos. Emails flew. Calls went unanswered. His access card failed at the entrance. Security escorted him out while people he once humiliated avoided eye contact. Power evaporates fast when it realizes it was never yours. He called me a dozen times. I let the phone ring. When I finally answered, my voice was calm, distant. "You ruined me," he said. "No," I replied. "You handed me the knife. I just didn't bleed." I hung up. The pregnant woman showed up at the house 2 days later. I was waiting. Curtains open. No dramatics. She stood at the door, eyes red, hands clenched around her bag. She looked younger up close. Not evil. Just foolish. "He said you knew," she whispered. I tilted my head. "Did he?" Her silence answered for her. I slid another envelope across the table. Inside were copies, bank transfers, messages, promises he had made to both of us, proof. Truth printed and undeniable. "He doesn't own anything anymore," I said gently. "Not even lies." Her face crumpled. "What am I supposed to do?" I studied her carefully. She was carrying his child, but she wasn't my enemy. She was collateral damage in a war he started. "Leave," I said. "Build something clean. And never let a man convince you that secrecy is romance." She left crying. I didn't follow. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. But revenge isn't a single strike, it's a process. Over the following weeks, his world shrank. Invitations disappeared. Friends stopped calling. Stories leaked, quietly. Surgically, not scandals. Just facts. Enough to make people step back. Enough to stain. He tried to fight it. Filed motions. Threatened countersuits. But every door he knocked on had already been locked from the inside. Because I had been patient. One evening, he showed up drunk. Standing in the rain like a bad cliché. I watched from the window as he pressed his forehead against the glass. "I loved you," he said when I opened the door. I didn't let him in. "You loved what I provided," I corrected. "Stability, silence, cover." He laughed bitterly. "So this is it, you win." I stepped closer. My voice dropped. "No," I said. "This is just equilibrium." I closed the door while he was still talking. Months passed. I rebuilt quietly. Purposefully. The house was sold. The city changed. I changed with it. One afternoon I ran into him by chance. A cafe. He was thinner. His suit cheap. He looked up and froze when he saw me. I was radiant. Not because of clothes or makeup, but because I was unafraid. He stood unsure. "Can we talk?" I considered him like an old photograph, something from another life. "There's nothing left to say," I replied. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, desperate. "She left me?" he said. "The baby, she won't let me see it." I paused. Just for a second. Then I said, "Actions have consequences," and walked away. I never looked back. Because the most brutal revenge isn't destruction. It's survival. It's silence. It's becoming untouchable. And somewhere out there, a man leaves with the knowledge that the woman he underestimated didn't just catch him. She erased him. The weeks that followed were almost surreal. The world seemed to keep turning, but his world had stopped, frozen mid-step like a bad photograph. Every morning, I would wake up to the quiet of the apartment, the city humming softly outside, and I would smile. It wasn't joy, not really. It was the satisfaction of precision, the cold, sharp satisfaction of watching someone crumble, because they had built a life on lies, and assumed no one could ever see the foundation crack. I immersed myself in my own life. Mornings became long walks through the city streets, afternoons spent in small cafes, where I observed people with quiet scrutiny, and evenings devoted to reading contracts, financial statements, anything that reminded me of the power I now wielded. Not just over him, but over myself. He had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had handed me something far greater than revengey freedom. Then the calls started. Not from him, he had stopped. No, the first call was from the board members of his company, the ones who had quietly been watching everything fall apart. "Mrs. Carter," a man's voice said, clipped and cautious. "It seems there have been some developments regarding your husband's holdings. Would you like to discuss restructuring?" I smiled into the receiver. "I think I already have," I said softly. "Thank you for your concern." After that, the messages began. People I had never met reaching out, offering opportunities. Invitations to sit on boards, to invest, to speak. Reputation had a way of bending itself toward the careful, and I had been meticulous. One evening, I found myself back at the hospital where it all began. Not for the thrill of it, not for the pain, but because I needed to see how far I'd come. The hallway smelled the same. Antiseptic and fear. The woman, his former mistress, was there, holding her child, a tiny human with a face full of hope. She looked at me, startled at first, but there was no malice in her eyes. "He's gone?" I said quietly. "Not needed, but I said it anyway." She nodded. "Yes." I stepped closer. "You have a chance. Build something different. Build it on honesty. You'll thank yourself one day." She held the child close, eyes bright, and for a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of tenderness. Not weakness, not regret. Just recognition that life moves forward in strange ways, and sometimes, even the broken pieces form something unexpected. Back home, the phone rang again. This time it was him. I didn't answer. He left a message, voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix it," he said. "Please, I can't live like this." I listened, the words sinking in like cold stones in a pond. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the hollow remnants of the man he thought he was. I deleted the message. That night, I dreamt of the elevator. The mirrored walls reflecting both of us, but he was smaller, fading. I reached out, not to him but to the space he had once occupied in my life. Empty, yes, but quiet, safe. Mine weeks turned into months. Every time I walked through the city streets, I imagined him somewhere, struggling. Imagined him wondering why the world no longer bent to him. I allowed myself satisfaction, deep and slow burning. Revenge, I realized, wasn't in the shouting. It was in the disappearance. Then, one rainy afternoon, he appeared. Not at the door, not through calls. He cornered me outside a cafe. His clothes were damp, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked defeated. "I need to see you," he said. Voice ragged. I studied him for a long moment. I didn't step back. I didn't smile. I simply let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "You already saw me," I said finally. "And you already lost?" "No," he whispered. "You don't understand. Everything, I'm ruined. I need guidance. I need help." I shook my head slowly. "There is nothing left to guide, nothing left to help. You built your empire on deception, and now you're learning what it's like to stand on truth." He looked away, shame washing over him like a cold tide. The man who once held power, who once commanded loyalty, now looked like a shadow of himself. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. I paused. I considered him. I considered everything he had done. The lies, the betrayals, the quiet arrogance that had made me nearly invisible to him. And then I smiled, not because I wanted to hurt him further, but because I was free of him. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. I pity you, and pity is far worse." He didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. He never had. I walked away, the rain soaking through my coat, the city alive around me. Every step was deliberate, confident, unshakable. He watched, silent and small, as I disappeared into the crowd. Life continued. I built new relationships, friendships, business alliances, a network of people who respected strength and honesty. He remained a cautionary tale. Whispered about in the corridors of the corporate world he once dominated. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear the faintest echo of his mistakes, a reminder that the world balances itself eventually. The most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. One evening, I attended a charity gala. My first since everything had fallen apart. The room was filled with the city's elite, people who once considered my husband untouchable. I moved through the crowd with elegance, purpose, and an invisible crown. When his name came up in conversation, it was spoken with pity, barely concealed amusement. No threats, no envy. Just quiet acknowledgement of someone who had overreached and lost. I sipped my champagne and smiled to myself. Silence, I realized, had been my ally all along. Patience had been my weapon. And when the time was right, I had struck with precision. Back home that night, I sat alone in the apartment, looking out at the city lights. I thought of him, of the child, of the woman he had loved, or at least used. And I realized that revenge wasn't a single act, it was a symphony. Each note carefully placed, each pause intentional, and now the symphony was complete. I poured another glass of wine and raised it quietly. To myself, to freedom, to justice. To the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some people underestimate the strength they inspire in others, and when that strength awakens, there is no stopping it. The phone rang again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear him. I didn't need to see him. The world had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, in my favor. And the silence that followed his absence was sweeter than any word he could have offered. I walked to the window and stared at the skyline, breathing in the night air. Somewhere out there, he was learning the hardest lesson, that betrayal carries consequences. That lies, once planted, grow wild and eventually strangle the one who planted them. I had survived. I had endured. I had waited. And now I thrived. The final truth settled in my bones: revenge is never about anger. It is about patience, intelligence, and the quiet, unstoppable power of a woman who refuses to be broken. And in the shadows of a city that had once celebrated his arrogance, I stood untouchable, unstoppable, unbroken. The man who had caught me off guard, who had stolen the life I thought I had, no longer had a place in it. And I smiled, finally free, knowing that some victories are so complete that words cannot contain them. The weeks that followed were almost meditative. Life had shifted like tectonic plates beneath the city. I moved carefully, deliberately, every step a statement, every glance a measured act of control. I wasn't walking through life anymore. I was orchestrating it. News of my husband's fall had spread like wildfire through the corporate underworld. But I had learned long ago that destruction without strategy is chaos. I was meticulous. I watched from the edges, letting the board handle the fallout publicly, while I quietly ensured that every asset, every connection he thought untouchable, was either out of his hands or rendered useless. People he had counted on, lawyers, investors, friends, now treated him like a ghost. Every call he made was ignored, every plea for help was met with polite silence. He existed, but he did not influence. I began taking control of my own finances, not because I needed to, but because it felt good, deliciously satisfying, to know that the tools he had underestimated in me could create stability and power. I invested carefully, spoke to the right people, and built alliances that he would never have imagined. He had thought me weak, passive, even fragile. I had simply been gathering my patience, refining it like a blade. One rainy afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. It was her, the pregnant woman. She walked in carefully, holding the child in her arms, eyes wary but not hostile. The little one was tiny, swaddled in a soft pink blanket. He looked peaceful, innocent, unaware of the storm his father had unleashed in the world. I didn't know where else to go, she said quietly, voice almost trembling. He's lost everything. And she faltered, glancing at the baby. I don't know what to do. I gestured for her to sit. You do what you should have done from the beginning, I said gently. Raise the child. Build a life that isn't built on lies, and stay away from him, for your sake and his. Her lips trembled. Do you hate me? I leaned back, studying her carefully. No, I said. Hate is heavy. You're too light for that, but you will remember me. You will remember that some people wait quietly, and when they act, it is absolute. That's all. She nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind my words. She left shortly after, carrying her child, leaving behind the residue of chaos that had once been his life. I watched her go, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep sense of closure. That night, I returned to the apartment and poured a glass of wine. My phone rang. I didn't need to see who it was to know. But I answered anyway. Please. His voice cracked over the line. Please. I can't handle this. I need you. I let the silence stretch. The rain outside tapped against the windows, a soft, steady rhythm. I already told you, I said finally. There is nothing left. You built your life on deception, and now you live in the ruins of it. That is all you have. You can't just leave me like this, he pleaded. I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't leave you. You did, long ago. I hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not empty. It was full of power, full of the echo of someone who had finally learned the rules too late. Weeks later, I attended a gala. My name had circulated quietly among circles of influence, people who respected intelligence, foresight, and patience. The room was alive with glittering lights and murmurs of business deals, but my focus was quiet, contained. I moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who knows the truth. Control is the ultimate luxury. I overheard whispers of him. my husband, spoken in hushed tones. People remembered him not as the man he had been, but as a cautionary tale. Not powerful, not respected, just gone. He had become the ghost of arrogance. A reminder of what happens when you assume your world will never change. I sipped my champagne and smiled to myself. Every movement, every glance, every conversation was carefully curated. He had underestimated me at every turn, and I had waited, patient and silent, until the right moment. And now, I thrived. Late that night, I returned home, feeling the weight of the city's quiet beneath me. I walked to the window, looking out at the lights that seemed endless, and I thought of him. He existed somewhere in the city, diminished, defeated, broken in ways that could never be repaired. And yet, he was still alive. Alive, but powerless. The child, the symbol of his betrayal, was growing, innocent and untarnished by the darkness that had consumed its father. I thought of the woman who carried him away from chaos, raising him in a world she would shape with honesty and care. My revenge had never been about pain. It had been about restoration. Restoration of power, restoration of dignity. Restoration of life for those who deserved it. One morning, I found myself walking along the pier, the water stretching endlessly before me. The city hummed behind, distant, detached. And in that quiet I felt the fullness of my actions. I had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, and now I stood unshakable. A man approached, older, calm. A figure I did not recognize. He watched me for a long moment. "You've handled everything," he said finally, with precision. "Without error. You're remarkable." I nodded. Not proud but aware. "Patience is power," I said, "and silence is sharper than any blade." He smiled faintly and walked away. I watched him go, realizing something profound. The true power in revenge is not destruction. It is transformation. It is waiting until your enemy's own actions have paved the way for their undoing, and then stepping in with precision, quiet, and control. Returning home, I poured another glass of wine, settling into the deep quiet of the apartment. The phone rang again. But I let it ring. I didn't need validation. I didn't need recognition. I had orchestrated a downfall so complete, so absolute, that words could not contain it. I sat by the window, listening to the night, thinking of the man who had once thought himself untouchable. He had underestimated me. And now he existed in the ruins of his own making. And I, calm, composed, unbroken, stood above it all. Revenge had been my teacher. Patience my ally, silence my weapon. And now, in the stillness, I realized that I had not only survived. I had triumphed. The most powerful moment came when I finally allowed myself to laugh, soft, low, unrestrained. Not at him, not at the chaos he had caused, but at the truth of it all, that a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed could wait, plan, and strike with a precision that left her unchallenged, untouchable, and unstoppable. And so, the city continued to move, indifferent, unaware that somewhere above its streets, a woman had mastered the ultimate revenge, not pain, not ruin, but complete, undeniable freedom. I poured another glass of wine, looked out at the skyline, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fully alive. The man who had caught me with his lies had vanished from my world. And in his place, there was only me. Quiet, patient, unstoppable, free. Forever. I stepped onto the balcony, city lights stretched beneath me like a glittering ocean, and for the first time, I felt the weight of everything lift. He was gone, not just from my life, but from power, from control, from the world he thought he owned. Every empire he had built, every lie he had whispered, every hand he had used to manipulate, now belonged to silence, and I was its ruler. I raised my glass to the night. Not for revenge, it had already been served. Not for justice, it had already arrived. But for myself. For the woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, betrayed, and yet had waited, watched, and struck with the precision of a storm no one saw coming. The city hummed below, indifferent, unaware. But I knew the truth. I was untouchable. I was unstoppable. I was free. And in that freedom, I smiled. A slow, unshakable, victorious smile. The last trace of him, the man who had thought he could break me, was gone from my world. Forever. And so was I, complete, unbroken, unstoppable. The end.